Well, greetings, everyone. So for the discussion post this week, I wanted to kind of fulfill a promise that I've made a couple times this semester, and that is to talk about a couple of events that we've had this course during this week, because I think they tie nicely into this week's reading. So the first was the experiment that we conducted in week 3, or I should say you guys conducted in week 3, and then the disjunctive reasoning example from the Stanovich reading. So for week 3's experiment, you may recall that you had identified a participant who was to recall as many words from 2 different lists as possible. So the first list was a set of random nouns, tulip, table, Russia, pony, etc. The second list was action words. I think they were like blink, cough, yawn, gargle, I think was one, etc. So I compiled the results, and I just wanted to kind of show them here. So if you just kind of eyeball these 2 columns, you'll see that in the random column, for the random words, they're all single digits, with 2 exceptions. The recall for the action group was pretty much almost flipped. It was all double digits with 1 exception. So the other thing that's really notable about the data here is that with 1 exception, and that's Talia's participant, the scores were higher in the action column. So the one comment I do want to make about Talia's participant is that there were 15 words total, 11 out of 15, especially when you consider, like, the conventional notion that working memory is about 7 items, give or take 2, and probably mostly take than give. 11 is really pretty darn high. So really, Talia's participant had far more opportunity to decrease than to increase on the next task, and that is what happened. Mary's participant also had 11, and still managed to get to increase her score. I think that's also, or his score. That's also pretty telling, I think. So that's kind of eyeballing it. If you look at the averages, they are pretty striking, about 8 to about 10 and almost a little over 10 and a half. Which again, given like there's only 15 possibilities in the range, I think was between 5 and 12. That's pretty striking. And I did run a paired samples t-test, and that also indicated that is a significant difference. It's probably not due to chance. So I think the thing I'd like you guys to consider is the question: did you guys all somehow manage to choose kinesthetic learners? With the exception of Talia, or is there something else going on here? Is there another explanation that can be drawn from the readings that we've had in weeks 1 through 6? The other event that I kind of want to draw our attention to is the disjunctive reasoning example from Stanovich. So you may recall that Jack is looking at Anne, but Anne is looking at George. Jack is married, George is not. Is a married person looking at an unmarried person? A, B, and C, and Stanovich claims that in his work nearly or about 80% choose C, cannot be determined. I just will say anecdotally, I've posed this question to probably 1,000 undergraduate students over my somewhat brief teaching career, and I'll say that I didn't get 80%. I probably got 90, 95%. I mean, it's nearly everyone chooses C. And I've done this with a handful of graduate students too, and the results are actually the same. It's no different. It's nearly everybody chooses C. But what I'd like to do is kind of challenge us to think about how a different way to present this question. And so let's, in a way that's much more meaningful actually for the learner. So what if we presented this visually? Maybe perhaps even in line with the guidelines provided by Mayer from last week's reading. So let's revisit this kind of maybe visually. So we have Jack looking at Anne, who is looking at George. So we know that Jack is married. We know that George is not. So the question is, we just don't have that information about Anne, and that's where most of us stop, right? So we say it cannot be determined. So Stanovich's point is that, we don't consider the different alternatives. And so here, it could be very well that Anne is not married. And so when we revisit this question as a married person looking at an unmarried person, When it's presented this way, the answer is blatantly obvious. And when we consider the alternative that she is married, the answer is still very, very obvious. So then the question is, are we all visual learners because presenting the information makes more sense this way? Or is it something about the presentation of the information? So again, I'd like for you guys to think about that. So the discussion question this week will be, what do these results tell you about learning? And how do they bridge the gap between what we've learned in weeks 1 through 6 and our readings from this week? And I very much look forward to your responses.